folks, my name's John Nord, and I'm going to show you how to make an inlaid turquoise pendant today. And this particular pendant was a custom order, and I priced it as what I thought it would take to make it, and I was proven wrong. Didn't make much money on this pendant, but the reason is there's some particular things that make it a very hard pendant to make, and I thought it would be a good video to show you how to overcome some things. This is the pendant I'm going to show you how to make right here. There's some things that make this pendant fairly hard to make. First of all, this ring here on top has a 1/4 inch diameter on the inside. It's 0.100 thick. It's about 1/4 inch across. The customer didn't want the chain going through here. They wanted a bell on top, so I put that. And then it has a solid piece of turquoise, Kingman turquoise, on the bottom. That's been had to inlay in there, which that's fairly easy. But right here is where the trick is. You can see this is looped in through the ring. What makes this all hard is, first of all, I didn't have any means of making a ring this thick, this small, perfectly. So I had to cast that, sand cast it, which I didn't anticipate. But I sand casted the ring, and then I had to solder not the top onto the bottom for the inlay, but then I had to take this loop and come through the ring and solder it on both sides, and to try to hold that in perfect alignment, also the bell in perfect alignment, all of this soldering and keep it all straight and everything took a lot of time. And then try to polish in and out of all these different places. So I think you'll find it an interesting video to watch, to see how I overcome some things. Now I'm sure there's jewelers out there that could overcome this stuff real easily, but me as an artisan, my main thing I started out is making spurs and buckles, and then I graduated into turquoise silver jewelry and some other things. I didn't have all the fancy equipment to do something like this, and I thought it was going to be easy. I thought, first of all, if I could have made that ring, I could have opened it up. I could have previously had the loop on top of the square, opened this ring up, put it through there, soldered it back together. But being 0.100 thick and the loop having to go through there, it was just a matter of trying to hold everything in alignment to get a good soldering job done, and then casting this and not anticipating that. So anyway, I'm going to go through some steps on how I did this, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Okay, to get started here, I've selected a piece of 16 gauge sterling silver, and I've glued my pattern there in the corner, and this is going to be the piece that forms the pocket for the inlaid turquoise. I'm going to drill a 1/16 inch hole in the center of it so I can cut the inside out of it, and then I will cut around the outside of it. And once this is soldered down onto another piece of sterling, which will be 18 gauge, it will form a pocket for me to put that Kingman turquoise down into. And I start cutting, put my saw blade in through the hole and start cutting around the inside edge of this, and I keep the saw blade waxed up to make it turn smooth and all. I usually use a number 1 or number 2 blade on this type of cutting. I use a finer blade on filigree and that kind of stuff. Anyway, I just cut all the way around until I get this cut, and there's that. And then I'm going to put it around the outside of it. Sometimes I drill a hole on that too, but here I'm just going to go around the outside of it. It's pretty close to the edge. So So I cut all the way around the outside edge, and then that will give me a border just solder down on the other piece of sterling. And keep the filings out of the way with this little brush I got. And there it is. That will make my pocket. Okay, next I use carburetor cleaner to release the paper and glue from this piece I cut out. It works real well. You just spray it on there and then let it soak a second and the paper comes right off. And then I'm going to take some 400 grit sandpaper and I'm going to smooth the top and bottom sides of this up a little to make sure there's no burrs on it. Next I'm going to show you the loop I bent for this piece. I used 14 gauge square sterling silver wire for it, and you have to make sure it fits the top of the square just right, and it also goes up and out to accommodate the ring. A good fit is a must. This is the ring I did, and I had to sand cast this. It's so thick and small that my ring bender wouldn't work on it, and my awls wouldn't work, and I just couldn't seem to bend that thick a ring by hand. But the sand casting worked good, and I think it's all gonna come out. It wasn't as efficient for me to sand cast it, but it worked out. Next I'm going to take the loop and I'm going to clean it up a little bit with this silicone wheel just to get any marks off of it from the bending it. And then you want to make sure it's halfway polished because it's kind of hard to get in there to polish it anyway. Now here I'm checking the fit of it. It's very important that you have a good fit on this so it'll solder up easily. So make sure it's right. Okay, next I'm going to flux this a piece of 18 gauge, which is what I'm going to use underneath this cutout piece. Our inlay pocket's going to solder down on this, so we flux it up good. And I use these stainless steel clips like I showed in one of my videos on how to make them. I use them to hold this in place so we can get it soldered down. We'll cut this out after we solder it up close to where it looks like one piece. Okay, now I've got my torch and I've got these piece fluxed up, and we're gonna apply some 65% silver solder chips to the inside of this pocket, and we're going to apply them by putting a little bit of flux on this titanium pick and then picking them up. It'll stick to that flux, and then when we stick it down on the hot metal or the hot silver, they'll release and lay down in that pocket. And this is the easiest way I've found to solder these pockets and bezel cups, things like that down, is using this chip solder. And I just spread a few around on the inside, and I keep my flame towards the outside so as to draw the solder underneath that border and out to the outside. And then I just cool it down and get the clips off of it and take a look at it and make sure everything's soldered tight. Then we're going to move over to the bench and cut it out. It looks good. I've got to solder this bail on top of this silver ring that I cast. This particular customer didn't want to run the chain through the ring. They wanted to have a bail on top of it. So I use fire scoff flux, and I heat up the ring first, and I got it down in my lava rock, and I heat it up, spray it with fire scoff because it has to be about 400 degrees to spray it. And then I've got the bail sitting on there with my third hand, and I spray it also, and I start heating around, and I'm trying to direct most of the heat. You can't really see it here, but I'm trying to keep that heat into the lava rock and onto the thick ring because it's so much thicker than the bail. And I'm going to add some 65% solder on this. The trick here is to try to keep the bail centered and in place while you solder it. You don't want it leaning to one side or anything like that. That's another thing that made this kind of tricky, is putting the bail on top of a smooth ring like that. But it came out pretty good. Okay, now I'm back at the saw bench, and I'm going to cut around this square that we soldered down, cutting right next to the top piece as close as I can. And I just cut around it, and after I get it cut out, well, then I'll take a sanding wheel and I'll smooth the edges up to where it looks like one piece, like there's no visible soldering line. And then you can see the pocket where the stone will go down into. The stone will be glued in this with 330 epoxy, and I'll show that here in a minute. Anyway, I go over all the edges and I try to make them real smooth to appear as one. Now here I'm taking a carbide bit, grinding bit, background cutter I call it, and I'm gonna go down into this pocket, and I'm gonna make sure all the edges inside there are crisp and square. And you know, when you solder this down, it tends to round them. And then your stone goes down in there and it won't go all the way down because you got rounded edges. Now you can overcome this a little bit by tapering or knocking off the 90-degree edge on the bottom of the stone, but I prefer to just cut it with that carbide cutter a little bit. But I still chamfer the bottom edge a little bit just to make sure. So you push it down in there too hard and it's got an air pocket under it, it'll break the stone. Now I cut this stone out at my shop with my cutter, and I cut it from rough Kingman turquoise, and I polished it a little bit. It's more just a square slab. It's a little thicker than the pocket, which it needs to be because you're going to sand this down to meet the silver after the glue has dried that's holding it in there. So I put a mask on, and I'm going to just kind of hit the edges with a 180 grit orbital, and it works pretty good on turquoise. And I can just kind of it's a pretty close fit already, but I've got to take a little bit off the sides to make it fit real tight. And I keep checking it here to see when it's going to have the right fit. I don't want to make any big gaps or anything. It's looking pretty good here. Check it and make sure it's going to sit flat in there. You can kind of tell by looking at the side from the side to see if it's tilted or anything. But this one's okay. Okay, here's the difficult part that I found of this, and it was how to hold all this while I solder this loop down. So I drilled a 1/2 inch hole in my soldering board, which is soft and it's easy to drill through, and then I was able to drop the bail and the ring halfway down in that hole, and then lay the square part out on the board flat and the loop through the ring and butt it up against the square inlay piece. I didn't know how else to hold this and keep it all straight while I solder it down, but it's all been pre-fluxed, and I'm soldering here one edge at a time. I'm going to turn it. I got one side done, and I'm going to rotate it around and try to get the other side without it moving too much. But the hole in the soldering board, the soft soldering board that I use, really helped me out here. I would have had to made some kind of a jig to hold it otherwise. I didn't have the proper holding tool to keep it still, but this worked real good. It held it real tight, and I got it soldered on there all straight, looks like to me. And I had a stainless clip you can see through the ring to hold that loop up against the side. And there it is. It looks pretty darn straight. I'm surprised. Okay, now I had to get my silicone wheels, and I used wheels and a bullet point and some bristle brushes, and I went all over this thing and all inside the ring and inside the bell, around the edges of the square piece, over the back, and just got it all cleaned up. There was a little bit of excess solder around the bell area, and I got that cleaned off. These silicone wheels are pretty good to clean up solder, but you got to be careful because they can make a divot. Anyway, and here I'm using the bullet silicone to go inside that ring, and then it's also pretty good over the top of the ring and down the sides of things. Anyway, I just keep cleaning it up, and then I'm going to my bristle brushes here. I've got various grits of these, and I started out with the pink, and then I went to the tan. I used a blue to start with, I think, to take out some of the scratches. But anyway, these polish things up pretty good. They're not quite as good, I think, as a felt wheel, but they're pretty good. Okay, now comes the time to glue the turquoise down into the pocket, and I'm mixing up some 330 epoxy, which I normally use for this. And when you're using 330 epoxy, you want to mix it and stir it thoroughly, but you also want to stir it like flat. You don't want to just get real vigorous with it because it'll cause a lot of air bubbles. So I just kind of swirl it around flat down on the cardboard piece, and I still get a few air bubbles, but not as bad as if I was really stirring it a whole lot. Now I just kind of pick some up. I use a little screwdriver to do this, and I pick some up and make sure I got it all on the inside of this. I don't want to fill the pocket. Of course, the stone's going down in there. But anyway, I coat the bottom of it good, and I do want the epoxy to squeeze up through the sides if there's any voids. But once I have that set, I just push the stone down in there. I've already pre-fit it, and then we'll set it aside and let it dry. I usually let it dry 24 hours. Okay, I'm taking a 180 grit orbital and I'm going to sand the top of this turquoise stone down even with the surface of the silver. And the shape of this pendant, I couldn't do it on my water wheel out in the shop. So this is going to have to work. Now here I've gone to a felt wheel and I've got white compound and I'm just buffing over the scratches, getting it all shined up good, polishing the surface of the stone real nice. And the white compound works real good for that. And then I'm going to change my felt wheel and I'm going to go to Zam, and that's going to put a high shine on the stone surface and the silver around it. We've got this all flattened out and it's all level with the silver. I've taped the pendant up. You can see I didn't want to get any scratches on it while I was sanding the stone. Now I'm taking the tape off. It's that blue tape. And there you go. I've got all the tape off of it and you can see. And I'm putting some more Zam and I'm going to go over the whole entire pendant here to get it all shined up for a final polish. And there's a lot of little nooks and crannies on this. A lot of the inside pieces I shined up with silicone wheels, but the outside I'm going over with this felt tip or this felt wheel and the Zam. It does a real good job on this small stuff. You can see here it's cleaned up pretty nice. I'm using a little foam polishing pad here to go over it a little bit further. It really makes a nice shine, these little foam pads. And there you go. Well, that's the end of the video. I hope you learned something from that, or just one thing. If you could learn one thing from it, I did my job. And I hope to come out with some more videos soon. Please like and subscribe my video. And I have, I think, 39 other videos on this channel that you can go through and learn some things on. So I appreciate you tuning in. See you next time.